Okay, we're now delighted to have Brian Proctor, the founder, president, and CEO, chairperson of Trash Taker Outer, coffee maker of Mente Group. And he is also here in his role as president of NARA. Is it his president, isn't it? Or is it chairman? I don't know if you take the Chinese model or the American.
I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Okay, I'm going to hand it to Brian.
Thanks, everybody. Where's the clicker? So it's a pleasure to be here. Alistair, congratulations. This is a great venue, great crowd, and it's an honor to be up here in front of everyone. Today I want to talk about a couple of things. Al initially asked me to talk about the markets and what we're seeing, so I'm going to spend about half the presentation on that. And then the other half of the presentation about what we're talking about in terms of market efficiency. So first thing, if you have clients right now who are thinking about buying an airplane, there has never been a better time ever in the history of business aviation than right now to buy a plane. And so all the OEMs need to stand up and clap, please. But thank you, Michael. In the US, obviously tax reform is affecting buyers in the way that they're viewing the market. Anecdotally, between December 20th and December 30th of this past year, we had two people who weren't on our radar at all who contacted us and bought airplanes. That means LOI, contract, inspection, closing prior to the end of the year. That's a small number, but obviously it's a big number when you look at multiply us times all of the other companies out there. The point is that the tax effect in the US is driving demand for business aircraft. The second thing that's happening is that market conditions and pricing, since 2014 to today, we've never seen a period of time where there's been more market depreciation. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And so values are better than they've ever been. And then the dollar relative to the euro. So the good news right now for Europeans is that the dollar is weakening relative to the euro, which is making aircraft cheaper. And so we anticipate with that, we've done a bunch of research on this and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So US tax reform, just the highlights, 21% corporate tax rate, down from about 35%. That's a big deal. That means a lot more cash for US corporations. Right now, our business is doing about 50% more consulting with US publicly held companies on acquisitions than we were this time last year. The point of that is that people are thinking right now about buying airplanes. And again, I can't reiterate, if you have someone thinking about buying a plane, they need to move now. For pass-through companies like ours, we're an LLC. It's effectively a 29% pass-through. That's down from about 39%. That's good news. That means there's more cash in the system to buy aircraft. And Chad talked a little bit about it before, 100% depreciation in year one if the aircraft is used primarily for business. That's a big deal. And it works for both new and pre-owned airplanes, so it's going to affect both the OEMs and the pre-owned market. And the impact of that is, we've already felt it, Chad's already felt it, Brad Harris has already felt it. I mean, the brokers in the US are feeling it right now. I'm sure the OEMs have the same thing. So these are the questions that Al asked me to address. Is the business aviation market finally turning the corner? Yes. What is selling? Everything. We're closing today on a 1988 Hawker 800. The commission won't buy my trip over here, but we are closing on a 1988 Hawker 800 today, and it's good. But primarily 2010 and newer, that's where we see most of the activity. So aircraft that are current with regard to ADS-B, some of the other things that are going on around the world in terms of it's important, but 2010 and newer is where most of the action is. Why are prices still falling? They aren't, they've stabilized. There's still a couple of micro markets where we're seeing a little bit of a degrade in pricing, just normal, but in every major market, Challenger 300, G550, G450, prices are stabilized or have started to rebound a little bit. Can we call this the start of the recovery? No. Actually, the recovery started in fourth quarter 2016. We weren't able to put our hands around it. I think that everyone who's been in the transaction market in the last 12 months has seen more activity, it's hard right now to get into a pre-buy facility. It's hard to find good equipment. So I think that the recovery actually started in fourth quarter 2016. However, the market was so bad that it's just taken a while for that to unwind. And we are in the middle of that unwinding process right now, and our forecast, we expect prices to begin to increase in third quarter of this year. I'll say that again. We think the prices will begin to increase in third quarter of this year. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So let's talk about the market first. Let's look at the G550. 12 months ago, there were 29 airplanes available for sale. Today, there's 16. That's about a 45% reduction in the available market in the G550, pre-owned. If you look at the market index, this is an average of G550s since 2010. You can see what happened in terms of values. From 2016, the market lost 26% of the value. The point of this is that there's a tremendous amount of value in this asset class. It's not just for the G550. If we're looking at the Challenger 300, again, in January of last year, 39 airplanes for sale. Today, roughly 26, 43% reduction. So we're seeing a lot more demand, a lot more activity in the markets, and what we haven't seen yet is a massive change in pricing, but it's beginning. If you look at the Challenger 300, it lost 27% of the market value from an index standpoint since the beginning of 2016. The point of this is that there's more value than ever, and you can buy more with your dollar, pound, euro than you ever could before. And so it's what you can get for what you want to spend today it's never been better. When you look at the dollar versus the euro, this is an example. Assume a $20 million Challenger 350. Sometimes you can buy it better, sometimes you can buy it worse than that, but just for assumption's sake, assume a $20 million airplane. In January of 2017, that airplane was roughly 19 million euro. Today, that same airplane is roughly 16 million euro. It's roughly a 15% price reduction in 12 months, simply because of the strength of the dollar relative to the euro. Now, if you're a European buyer and someone said, hey, you can buy the airplane for 17, and you compared it to a year ago where you could buy it for 19, that still sounds like a good deal. So what that means is that there's going to be an upward pressure in pricing with the new aircraft. It's going to also happen across the board in the pre-owned markets. Last year, we had just started some research, and I mentioned a little bit about this in CJI in 2017, and what we were calling this was a priceless recovery, and our forecast was that markets were going to stabilize within 18 to 24 months. We had looked at a G550 2003, and we had run a comparison of the U.S.-dominated market 2006 and before with now more of a global market 2007 and beyond. And we began to see some interesting things. What we realized is that if you do a 6-month lag in the aircraft market, roughly there's an 86% correlation, and this is what we talked about last year. Since then, we have researched the entire market. We've looked at every make model back through the mid-'80s. Our research has shown that there's about an 80% correlation between the dollar and a basket of international currencies, primarily led by the euro. Assuming, again, all makes and models, and with a multiple month lag, that 80% correlation is there. Now, given what's going on with the dollar relative to international currencies, we think that the airplanes are becoming cheaper for the international marketplace, and we think that this is going to drive demand. Given where the dollar began to inflect versus the euro, we estimate that by third quarter of this year, that's when we're going to see prices starting to change. So again, I want to reiterate, if you have someone who's thinking about making an investment, we're all corporate aviation investors here. Alistair, thanks for the name of the conference. Now is the best time that we have seen in 30 years to buy an aircraft. I want to talk a little bit about market inefficiency, and I'm going to take off my Mente hat now and put on my NARA hat. One of the things that we're seeing is that the marketplace in general, there's a certain amount of noise that's going on in the marketplace, driven by a couple of different factors, and it's causing owners to question aircraft ownership. Unfortunately, I was in a meeting earlier this year with a billionaire in California. He's a .com guy. And he said that the worst business decision he's ever made was to buy a business jet. And he currently owns a 550 and a 650. And he's trying to sell one of the two aircraft. And because of what was going on in the market, he was just absolutely pissed at the marketplace, in the industry. And so a little bit of a case study. Back in 2016, this is not this guy, this is another transaction we're aware of. It was a G550 disposition. The buyer was unwilling to hire a broker. The buyer wanted to buy the airplane based on the research that we did and the information we were given. He was willing to buy the plane at $24.3 million. The seller at the time was willing to sell the airplane for $24 million. There was a broker who had contact with the buyer, and he wanted to back the airplane, meaning buy the airplane, flip it to the buyer without putting up his own deposit, and sell the airplane for $24.6 million. So he wanted to spread $600,000. The aircraft, from the time that the initial LOI was put up until the time that the deal died, was 45 days. Now remember, this is 2016, what was going on in 2016. In that period of time, just according to VREF and Blue Book, the aircraft lost about $1.25 million just by sitting on the market, languishing. The aircraft ultimately sold for $22.75 million. The point of this is that right now, according to Amstat, in 2016, 2017, there were roughly 1,060 brokers who conducted transactions. 4,600 aircraft that were traded, turboprops, jets, with 1,060 brokers. 946 of those brokers did less than 10 transactions. Now, if you look at the tail on this dog here, you can see that about 600 of these brokers only did 1 or 2. That's a lot of noise in the marketplace, and so what we see is that of this number, about 90% of these brokers don't meet the narrow standards, the standards that were part of the organization that Chad and I belong to. So the issues: many aircraft buyers, their first experience in aviation is with a pre-owned aircraft broker. With 1,000+ brokers with no standards, there's havoc in the space. And anybody who's been involved in the pre-owned market without representation knows that and has seen it. Most customers assume that there's oversight. I mentioned at CJI in Miami in December that in Texas, the person who cuts my hair requires 1,500 hours of training in the state of Texas to get a license to cut hair with this. You know, just imagine what it would be for somebody with real hair like Michael Malfitano. But 1,500 hours of training to cut this, and right now there's no oversight with brokers around the world. Most customers assume that there's hidden money in a transaction. Typically there's not, but most assume that there is. But what we're seeing is that there's fee pressure as a result of no standardization in a fragmented industry. And this is causing questionable behavior, like the broker that I mentioned with the G550 transaction, where they're trying to seek margin. And so the point is that brokers are making money, just that there is hidden money in these transactions, and most people don't know where the money's coming from. And we think it's time, as NARA, to clean this up. And so in 2018, we're going to focus on about 3 major initiatives. We're going to try to raise awareness and profile of the profession with advocacy, marketing, and PR, because there are a lot of brokers out there that are doing it right. I'm looking at Guardian Jet right here on the front row. You know, they do a great job with their clients, and so we're proud to be associated with them. We're going to increase standardization, and what we're really focusing on is, if you think about the transactions process from LOI through closing, there are several areas in the transactions process where there's a rub. And so what we're going to try to do is, through the process of standards, put grease in those rub spots of the transaction to standardize contracts, standardize LOIs, create a certification program for brokers and dealers globally, and work in the ethics area. I know that there's a large push. NBAA just announced ethics policy. EBAA is looking at it. NATA is looking at it. So ethics right now is important. And it's not just in the buying and selling of airplanes, it's in every area of the business aviation transaction space. Another goal of ours is to resource our member firms better, to reduce their costs, to help them with competitive advantage, but also to create some transparency in data. Right now, as Chad mentioned, there's a lot of data that's floating around. We all have access to some of these data sources. A lot of times when someone posts the sale price of an airplane, it causes more damage than it helps, because people, if you aren't a student of the industry, you may not understand that a G550 that traded for $15 million should have traded for 15. It's not a low bar. And that G550 may have run off of a runway and had a new wing attached to it and therefore deserves the $15 million price point. But if you're an uneducated buyer or an uneducated advisor and you're advising that person, you're going to arbitrarily rush to the bottom, and I think that that creates downward pressure in pricing, and so people will use the data that they get to try to drive values low. And one of our goals at NARA is to make sure that the data is there, that it's more transparent, and that people can actually use it to help them make better decisions. The goal is to improve overall market efficiency. I think that this helps not only the owners, but I think it helps the industry as a whole. It helps lenders, it helps brokers, it helps OEMs, it helps everyone. And so at NARA in 2018, with the support of the board, we just voted on this new strategic plan. We're going to implement it starting immediately. Takeaways. Never been a better time to buy. I will say it again, never been a better time to buy. If you have anyone thinking about it right now, if they don't move quickly, within the next 6 months, they're going to be paying more for the same airplane. So you have to go now. Assume that the market will be in full swing in third quarter of 2018. And as an industry, let's focus on a new era of market efficiency. Thanks. Any questions?
Do we have any, grab a seat, Brian, you can relax now. Any questions for Brian? I'm going to ignore all the ones about hairdressing, and there have been several, including people wondering if Michael's hairdressers as qualified as Brian's. We've got a question now from Richard Beckermeyer.
Same as I asked Chad, are you going to see a shortage of product to sell? Are you going to have start to have?
We are.
Yeah.
Right now, we've got a client, and this is anecdotal, but they approached us about 2 months ago to buy a pre-owned G280 with a price range in the $16 to $17 million range. And that aircraft, there's two in the world market. Due to configuration and ownership pedigrees, they don't work for our client. And so that's forced us now to go to the OEMs. And so we're talking with 3 of the major OEMs about their products. And so that's pushed us from pre-owned to new. And so we think that there will be a shortage of product. I mean, if you think about the U.S., the U.S. just announced housing sales in December of 2017. Housing sales went from 3.2% down to 2.8%, so it looked like it was a decrease. Meantime, the available inventory in the U.S. went from 6 months to 3 months. Prices have gone up by 20%. So the point of it is that there's going to be a scarcity of inventory, and there's going to have a corresponding effect on pricing.
As far as I know, the yachting market and the yachting brokers are pretty well regulated, and they work with each other pretty transparently and have a set level of commission that the owners of airplanes don't really, negotiate too much. Do you see that happening in the aviation market at all? Is that what NARA is trying to achieve in the long run?
I think that if we go to an era where we have a commodity-based business of transactions done at $50,000, that it's going to be very, very hard for the businesses to exist, and the quality of the transaction execution will go down substantially. And so we are going to, we have to be very careful not to prescribe a certain commission level, because we don't want to get charged with price fixing. But at the same time, we believe that if there was a widely held belief of a seller pay model like in commercial real estate, with some standards within the fee structure, with minimums and maximum caps, a cap and a floor, that we would probably be better off. And so said differently, in this transaction, if there had been a 5% fee, 3% to the selling broker, 2% to the buying broker, there's no way in hell that that broker would have ever tried to back the airplane. He would have just taken his $400,000 and moved on.
So to summarize, you want to bring in standardized documentation so lawyers get paid less, but brokers get the same amount or more?
No, I was debating putting on this. That's a great question now. I was debating putting up, I didn't have enough time. If you'd given me about 3 more minutes, I would have put up another case study where we've seen that an airplane would go in through transactions process. Same situation, airplane gets tied up in purchase agreement for 45 days, deal blows up, and the lawyer has done everything in his in his care to try to protect the client. And he protected the client out of $1.25 million. And so, that it's, how much risk are you willing to accept? I think that there are a lot of opportunities for attorneys from a structuring standpoint. I think that there will still be complexities in transactions that you can't standardize in a contract. And so there's going to be a place for everybody in the process. But I think what we really have to be aware of is that brokers shouldn't try to be attorneys. Attorneys shouldn't try to be brokers. None of us should try to manage airplanes, because the level that's required at each one of those specialties within the business is so high that, and the problem that we've got is we've got such a decentralized market and so fragmented that there's a revenue grab and people try to do all of that.
And to be fair, the yacht lawyers seem to be making enough money with standardized documentation.
If the yacht market is an interesting market to compare against.
Any more questions in the room? Oh, yeah, we've got one second row. The mic is coming to you down there. Sorry. Holger.
Holger Ostermer, DC Aviation Alpstein, good morning. Now, it's so far we've been leading very technical discussions with one inconvenience in the middle. We're dealing with clients. The client's decision-making process is sometimes not as straightforward as it would suggest, or as it would be wished for from all of us. Not everybody within the clientele, especially up in the demographics of ultra-high net worth individuals, has got neither the best reputation nor the most common sense in making the decision. Because otherwise, people would always go for the highest product available. And that may be from legal support to financing. We are representing an aircraft management organization, and we are pretty much at the bottom end of the string. So I've mentioned it 2 years ago in Dubai already. This is a perfect call to everybody to try and remind ourselves what the industry is standing for, and to try, and I know this is a very difficult undertaking, but try and educate the client whenever possible. Because the most difficult task here is to reaching the beneficial future owner of the asset, and try and make people understand that whether it's financing, whether it's legal support, or whether it's the maintenance or management or of private and business aviation aircraft, we are requiring standards, those with a good reputation to comply with standards, and let's please promote those across the various different stakeholders that we have in the room here.
Great.
Great. I think we've got another question from the room.
Brian, question with regards to the numbers that you put up for the number of transactions. Could you clarify that? Because I think, if I may, the implication is such that if you do less than 10 in a year, that perhaps you're not as competitive. Whereas conversely, I've heard that if you do quite a few transactions, perhaps you're diminishing the level of service being delivered or putting the downward pressure on commission compensation as a result.
I didn't say either one of those. What I did say is that the number 10 is what we use as a standard entry point at narrow. And so you have to make a demarcation line. I mean, I could have made it at 2, because there's still 600 brokers that have done 2 transactions in 2017. And so at the end of the day, the point I was trying to make was that due to the sheer number of brokers with over 1,000, with 4,000 transactions, there's just a lot of noise there. And there are brokers out there that do 1 or 2 transactions that are very, very capable people. However, they wouldn't fit in the narrow standard. And so the concern is that, of that group of people that only do 1 or 2, can they bring the same capabilities to bear that a company like Guardian Jet or Dallas Jet or you or Jetcraft or Mente can bring to bear? And I know how hard we work with 19 employees to try to mitigate risk for our clients and not make mistakes. And we've got people that are specialists in appraisal technical, market, business, and we try to put together a lot of different skill sets at a very, very high level to help our clients. And if you are a one-person show, you just cannot provide the level of service that a Guardian Jet can, because you don't have the depth in the bench to do it. And the risk is that most of the owners don't see that, and they don't know, because they get emotional, or they think because they have made $1 billion that they can do an airplane transaction. And the problem is that there is a tendency right now to be a push to lower fees, and an owner who thinks he can do it all would be willing to maybe spend $50,000 with someone who's incapable of doing it versus paying Guardian $200,000 to do it the right way.
Okay, we've got lots and lots of questions, but we have got opportunities to cover them in the in later sessions. We're going to look at ADSB. We're going to look at simplifying transactions. Peter Antonenko has got a session on that. I just wanted to draw attention to in the case of the 1789 Hawker, the problem with selling a 1789 Hawker is often the parchment is very hard to read on the maintenance records. Yeah. Sorry, I should have corrected that one. Very quickly,
No,
yes.
well, it's interesting, Alistair, that aircraft is actually going to a ministry in Canada, so it's not even a U.S. buyer. But you know, there's a lot that could be said there. But ministries in Canada right now are buying 1988, for the record, 1988 Hawkers.
I think that's good. It's good to see. Very quickly, a few questions. You're the chairman, El Presidente, of the National Aircraft Resale Association. We're in London. A number of people have said, have you got any interest in making it international?
So in the board meeting, we discussed specifically expanding to both Europe, Asia Pacific, and we will be expanding the ranks. We did discuss changing the name of NARA.
Gara.
To whatever.
Gara.
Any recommendations, I'll be in the other room during the break. But we more than likely there will be a name change at some point. But because we live in an international marketplace, what I think that, you know, NARA has done a really good job of getting to where it is, but I think that we are now standing on the shoulders of those people, and it's time to raise the bar a little bit higher.
What I would do is just my one bit of consultancy, which I'll bill you for, is you don't want to rule out spacecraft, so I would go for the Galactic.
Galactic, that's nice.
Aircraft resale, or universal. Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you.